Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
2018 might go down as what many are calling the year of the FTK, a year in which we saw 3 completely different first turn kill Yu-Gi-Oh decks, top YCS, and other high-level competitive events. And Yu-Gi-Oh, it should go without saying that there's almost nothing worse than having to go second against one of these degenerate decks, because all the fun and interactivity that players have when dueling goes right out the window in lieu of one scumbag player basically playing solitaire while the other daydreams quietly trying not to die from boredom. Well, in this video, I'll be giving you my picks for the most rage-inducing and frustratingly dreadful FTK decks throughout all of Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Just so there's no confusion, I already did make a video titled The Top 10 Most Notorious OTK/FTK Decks of All Time over 4 years ago, but quite frankly, my production quality wasn't nearly as good as it is now, and the audio makes that video pretty damn unwatchable, so I think it's time for a makeover. I'd also like to note that this video is strictly for first turn kill decks, meaning you have to be able to win turn 0. While OTKs can be pretty awesome at times, even historic ones like Cyberstein or the Demise OTK won't be eligible for this list. Lastly, I'll be considering not just competitive results, but also the impact that the deck had on the ban list, and I'll even be including some OCG only FTKs just to spice things up a little bit. With that all out of the way, welcome to the top 10 FTK Yu-Gi-Oh decks of all time, the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Exodia FTK. Let's kick the list off with an FTK that's basically as old as time, being released all the way back in the very first booster set, Legends of Blue Eyes White Dragon. Exodia has always been one of the most iconic and popular monsters in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! For that reason alone, I felt that it deserved a spot on this list, despite never winning much competitively or even being properly used in the anime that popularized it in the first place. An FTK that requires you to hold 5 specific cards in your hand at one time is generally not going to be the most consistent thing the world has ever seen, and when those cards have been limited to 1 each for almost 2 decades, well, that's definitely not going to help things. But one thing is for sure, if you can manage to pull it off, it's arguably the most rewarding play in the entire game. Exodia, obliterate.
Exodia, obliterate!
Number 9, Dino FTK. Talk about the unexpected. Who would have ever imagined that a deck that summons 3 Firewall Dragons, a Decode Talker, and a Rank 9 Exceed monster, all in the first couple of minutes of its turn, would actually end up being a deck out FTK? What in the hell? Well, as hard as that is to believe, it's actually true, and while many players were still on the True Draco and Zodiac hype trains post Code of the Duelist being released, a very few intuitive players realized opening up Baby Sarasaurus and Diagrammed allowed you to do some utterly ridiculous things, like winning the duel, for instance. During this time, Firewall Dragon was also completely unlimited, so the shenanigans could obviously be ramped up to 10. Add this to the unerrated Grand Soil, Miscellaneous Sarasaurus, and True King Lithogasm all being unlimited, and it's actually quite surprising that the deck didn't outright win a YCS despite having a ban list that was pretty much tailor-made for its success. I suspect it's mainly because people didn't really learn about the deck until right about the time Konami was ready to bury it on the September 2017 ban list. Number 8, Gem Knight FTK. You knew I wasn't going to miss an opportunity to put one of my favorite fusion decks on the list, especially when after getting a Link monster seemingly out of nowhere, the deck reached its full potential and was finally able to break through and top multiple YCS events. Unfortunately, I can't claim it was done in the noblest of ways, as every top 32 or higher finish was done with the FTK variant of the deck. While the beatdown version of Gem Knights has taken a huge step forward with the release of Gem Knight Phantom Quartz, there's really no reason to use it when you can just outright win the duel on your first turn and leave nothing to chance. Thanks to Lapis Lazuli, Gem Knights have always had the ability to pull off fringe FTKs, usually with the aid of Black Garden, but now even with Master Diamond Limited, which was hit earlier in the year thanks to Konami discovering the FTK, the deck can still pull off the game-ending play consistently without a hitch.
強がりよ。今のあなたの手札はたった1枚。それじゃあ融合はできないわ。それはどうかしら。私は手札から永続魔法ブリリアントフュージョンを発動。
Number 7, Gishki FTK. You might remember the Shonen Jump winning Demise OTK, and I'm betting you definitely remember the Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series dominating Necron's deck, but many people forget this short-lived, highly effective Gishki strategy when they bring up successfully competitive ritual decks throughout the years. Well, I for one haven't forgotten, and I'm not talking about just the deck as a whole, but also how painstakingly long it actually took the deck to reach its deck out win condition. One of the most interesting things about the Gishki FTK was the fact that it was a deck out deck, but none of the monsters actually had deck out effects. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The actual deck outside came from cards like One Day Apiece, Cup of Ace, also Hand, and Card Destruction. In fact, you'd actually come close to decking yourself out, especially with all the cards that you draw off Royal Magical Library, but multiple copies of Eva Gishki Mind August would make sure that that never actually happened. To stop this FTK and other Gishki hand loops, Konami actually was forced to limit multiple cards within this archetype. Number 6, Pendulum FTK with Supreme King Starving Venom. If you thought that the Tyrant Neptune was the only card that was going to become broken thanks to the release of Lyra Loose, Independent Nightingale, and Maximum Crisis, you were sorely mistaken. I'm looking at you, Konami R&D, because the ironic thing is, while the Tyrant Neptune play was a pseudo FTK that gave your opponent one turn to live, using Supreme King Starving Venom to copy Nightingale in the graveyard was an actual FTK, and Starving Venom was released in the very next set. And when Pendulum Magician players learned that they could make just the minor adjustments to their deck and have a built-in FTK, it became one of the biggest nightmares in Yu-Gi-Oh! After all, with Electromite and Astrograph Sorcerer both completely unlimited, if you couldn't FTK your opponent, you were still playing the best deck in the entire game, so you could just fall back on what made the deck so incredibly strong to begin with. There was a massive upside with almost no trade-off. Number 5, Plant FTK and Blaze Phoenix FTK. Let's show some love out there for the OCG players by remembering their pain and their ever-burning fury towards these decks. First is the Blaze Phoenix FTK, powered by Blaze Phoenix, the Burning Bombardment Bird. Much like Gem Knight Lapis Lazuli, it really shouldn't be an FTK card, but much like Gem Knight Lapis Lazuli, the burn effect can be greatly amplified by a card like Black Garden. Funny how this card keeps popping up in these FTK decks, huh? Combine this with number 42 Galaxy Tomahawk, which gives you the materials needed for your Phoenix, and Fusion Gate, which allows you to continually fusion summon, and an FTK is born. Next, you have the Plant FTK, which was incredibly prominent and problematic in the OCG, but thankfully here in the TCG it was not a factor because Aromatherapy Jasmine was not yet released. We all know that the Plant engine can be easily exploited for link summoning, just as it was for Synchros during the 5Ds days, so having Lone Fire Blossom, Spore, Glow Up Bulb, and Dandelion all together at once is kind of like asking for trouble. The concept of the deck was simple. Use cards like Lone Fire Blossom and the Predaplants to load your graveyard up with a billion plant monsters, then summon Topologic Bomber Dragon, finally summon Phoenix and Cluster Amaryllis to your side of the field, and have it trigger Bomber Dragon over and over again, each time blowing it up. Every time Phoenix Cluster Amaryllis would be summoned to the field, you'd burn your opponent for 800 life points, repeat the process ultimately until they were dead. To no one's surprise, Konami went after these strategies aggressively, banning Cluster in both regions and limiting Phoenix, Lone Fire Blossom, Ortho Scorpio, and Dandelion in the OCG. Number 4, Shadow Priestess of Ohm FTK. It always seems like FTK decks sneak up on us and shock the world on the highest levels of Yu-Gi-Oh! Competition, and this was the deck that started that mantra. I've done a whole Yu-Gi-Oh! Story on how fascinating this deck's rise to being one of the best decks in the game was, but for the Cliff Note version, just know that Phantom Darkness was easily the most powerful of all the GX sets, and after it was released, it allowed Dark Attribute decks to basically do everything they could ever imagine. When combined with Dark Magician to Chaos and Dimension Fusion, the two best cards in the game, your Priestess now had infinite tribute fodder, and with the release of cards like Allure Darkness, the consistency of these decks skyrocketed to the heavens. Aaron Diaz piloted the deck to a second place finish at Shonen Jump Columbus, only being stopped by not a player, but the die roll itself. Number 3, Danger Darkwood FTK. 1 decade later, same problems. If I didn't know any better, I'd say the Danger Darkwood FTK was the second coming of the Shadow Priestess of Ohm deck, both of which came out of nowhere to take an impressive second place finish at a Shonen Jump or YCS event in their debut outing. The main difference, however, is because with the advancement in times, much like the Pendulum FTK, this deck has a full-on backup plan that can involve taking cards out of their opponent's hand with Topologic Gumblar Dragon, as well as backbreaking the gates gates with Tri-Gate Wizard. This would be used in the case of an early Hain Wada that would make the burn FTK impossible. Because of that on-the-fly adaptability of the Danger Dark Road FTK, it really does make it one of the scariest Yu-Gi-Oh decks of all time. Number 2, Magical Scientist FTK. Let's bring it back to what most, myself included, call the original competitive FTK. While Exodia was obviously released well before Magician's Force, Exodia FTK was incredibly unreliable, and the consistency between it and Magical Scientist FTK was basically day and night. The Scientist FTK revolved around getting Catapult Turtle on the field, usually through Last Will, then summoning Scientist and having him fusion massive monsters to your side of the field to launch the Catapult Turtle at your opponent. Triggering Last Will was quite simple, as Gillosaurus could be special summoned from your hand, and using cards like Monster Gate and Mystic Walk would send it to the graveyard, thus making Last Will live and giving you more life points or a new monster in the process. This was also a time in Yu-Gi-Oh where there were no hand traps except Karibo, which did absolutely nothing against the Scientist deck. It was the very definition of you go second, you will lose. Honorable mentions include Infernity Pendulum FTK and Junk Collector Magical Explosion FTK. Finally, to our number 1, Frog FTK. If you're an old school duelist like myself, just the name alone might send shivers down your spine. By the actual numbers, I might argue that Scientist FTK was slightly more consistent when it comes to pulling off the first turn kill, and I'm talking ever so slightly, like 2 to 3%. However, the Frog FTK was much more of a complete deck. For instance, if you somehow bricked with the Scientist FTK, you almost always lost the duel. However, Frog FTK could actually stall using the dupe Frog Lock that didn't allow your opponent to declare an attack. Also, because of Fishborg Blaster, the deck could actually win going second using the notorious Colossal Fighter Armory Arm OTK. So wrap your head around that. This deck was so powerful, quite frankly, it didn't matter whether it went first or second. This deck had the ability to end the game in its first turn, regardless of what happened in the die roll. This, without a doubt, puts Frog FTK in a league of its own amongst other FTK decks. Lastly, not only did we see Frog FTK win at the highest level events on the YCS circuit, but it also won the 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. Mic dropped. So let me know what you guys thought of the list. If there were any of your favorite FTK decks that didn't make it on the list, leave that in the comment section below. If you guys are interested in hearing more about these OTK and FTK decks of the past, leave that in the comment section below as well, and I'll make some Yu-Gi-Oh stories about these decks. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already. Turn on that notification bell for daily videos, and check out these other videos I know you'll enjoy. Subscribing makes life happy.